Hello everyone, my name is Mayo Agidi and I'm back here with the third video on Africa's trade with the West. The three key players in the West are America, the United Kingdom and the European Union. I've talked about it before that Africa's trade with the European Union is around 300 billion US dollars while Africa's trade with the United States of America is around 60 billion US dollars. You might ask the question, what then does Africa trade with the West? Africa trades with the West similarly to what Africa trades with China, raw materials for finished goods. Examples of some of these raw materials that Africa trades with the West is commodities like oil, where a lot of African countries do trade oil with Western countries, both America and the European Union, minerals, gold, platinum, uranium, and agricultural products. Raw agricultural products like cocoa and coffee and stuff like that. And we mostly import from them stuff like machineries, vehicles, pharmaceuticals, and luxury goods, different finished products. I would like to now talk about the Western investments in Africa. In terms of investment figures, the investment figures vary, but they are mainly in the telecommunication sector, the infrastructure sector, and the financial services sector. Most of these investments are usually done through public-private partnership instead of government-to-government investments or through fundings from loans from banks, from big bank institutions like the IMF or the World Bank. Like I did with the video on China, I would like to talk about the most notable investments that Western countries have done in Africa and their cost. So in this particular one, I could not find one single big project like the way China does. They are mostly initiatives. Like one particular initiative was called the Power Africa Initiative. It's an initiative that aims to create energy infrastructure for African countries. Like it costs around 7 billion. So it's like building different power systems for different villages in different parts of Africa, or different small towns or small areas in different parts of the different countries that make up Africa. So it's around the $7 billion fund. When I was doing the research on it, I didn't really see that much on it, but we hope they are doing something. Then another big project, like I said, they are not dams or train stations or stuff like that. They are mostly names. Like the second one is called European Green Deal Project. It focuses on mainly renewable energy and sustainable development, those words that they like to use. So the another third one is mainly from the UK, still focusing on renewable energies and stuff like that. So in my opinion, I think the trade or the investment that the West provides to Africa is quite timid, quite small. We already know this. They don't really have any care towards investing in the continent. It has been this way for a very long time. If not because China started investing in Africa, they would probably not have even looked in the direction of Africa. The West started trying to invest more in Africa again, mainly after China started trying to invest due to what I've talked about earlier, great power competition, them trying to gain more influence in Africa as China's influence rises and their own influence falls. So they are trying to sort of see how much influence they can keep hold of in the coming years. They try to compete with China by building their own versions of the Chinese infrastructure projects in Africa the best they can, because truth is that nobody can really compete with China when it comes to infrastructural building. Like nobody on planet Earth, no country on planet Earth can compete with China when it comes to infrastructure building. So they can do what they can, but they try to also talk about things like saying China is doing death trap diplomacy on Africans, and China is just trying to build all these things for Africans so that Africans can be in debt to China. So those are one of the ways in which they try to compete. They cannot really do things on the ground, so they just try to sort of, I'll call it bad mouthing what the Chinese are doing in Africa, saying, "Oh no, stay with us so that you continue to not get infrastructure and remain where you are." Those kinds of things. So another way in which they do try to counter Chinese influence in Africa is mainly through their strengths, like say the soft power diplomacy, the colonial relationships they currently have with the various African countries, and also their media, the bad mouthing the other guys and saying how great they are, things like that. So to honestly, in my opinion, that area is actually the area they've done the best at in terms of the whole anti-China rhetoric. There's a strong, even in Africa, upon all the things the Chinese have done, there's still a decent amount of anti-China rhetoric in Africa based on what other people told us about them. Very strange stuff to me though, but well, hopefully it changes as time goes on. The next thing I want to talk about is what are the challenges and criticisms of Western trade with Africa. So we've always heard about how aid in Africa is usually a net negative than a net positive, because it's like giving people money to fish without teaching them how to actually fish, because again, money is just paper. It means money means value. So if you give people money and you do not they do not the money does not add value to them, it's pretty much pointless. It's just going to eventually disappear or cause inflation or whatever. So, and the aid is usually very conditional. It's usually interfering in the affairs of the nations that they are trying to give the aid to. Like they'll tell you, oh, we'll give you this particular aid if you do this particular things the way we would like you to do this particular things. And to an extent, some of those conditions may not necessarily be in the best interest of the country that they are giving those loans to, or they are giving those aid to. Is mostly for their interest, because like I said, these people care about their own interest. Your interest is a side note to them. That's why you should always do your best to defend your own interests. The second criticism that they usually talk about is the unequal trade agreements. Most of the trade between Africa and the West is pretty much mostly beneficial to the West than to Africa. You see several situations, like we can talk about the France and the Africa and their francophone African countries, and the fact that France has more than 70% of the reserves of those countries in French central bank, and those countries literally have to ask France for their own money for them to be able to spend their own money. Those kinds of weird colonial relationships that the Africa has with Western countries. Those will I say the children of colonization, the leftover issues that stemmed from the colonial era. Those kinds of things. They are a lot of trade relationships between Africa and the West are leftovers from colonial past, and they are very unequal and very detrimental to the Africans and to the African nations and their potential for future growth. What are the current geopolitical implications of the West struggle with China for Africa? Africa is home to a whole lot of resources that the world needs at the moment. There's going to be a very long struggle for influence on African countries as the times go by, but African countries should aim, as usual, like I always say, to figure out their own interests. We have been seeing for a while now a strong anti-Western sentiment in Africa, especially in West Africa right now. We can see the Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali situation, whereby there was 3 consecutive simultaneous coups in those regions, and since then they've kicked out French influence, a lot of French influence from their countries. They've removed Western bases, like American base was removed from Niger. They've removed a lot of, they've tried to remove a lot of Western influence from their places. I think even Burkina Faso was trying to rename capitals or rename cities and towns and villages, removing French names from their regions and trying to name them more, name the names that are more local to their people. And recently to Senegal too has said that they are kicking out French influence from their societies. So I think there's a general gradual anti-Western push, especially in West Africa. It remains to see what comes out of it. I'm for it, obviously. I'm definitely for it. I believe that a lot of the unfair relationships between Africa and the West, especially now that there are other players in the field, must end, and better relationships could be made in the future. I've always talked about this strategic interest. We need to think about our own strategic interests. I don't think it is sensible to align ourselves with either China or the West. I believe that we should seek to form proper relationships with both, relationships that benefit us. In my opinion, at the moment, our relationship with China benefits us much more than our relationship with the West, because it has a bigger chance of helping us get to the level we need to get to be able to start to do things more indigenously, to build better things indigenously. But we shouldn't also discount the West and say, okay, no more trade with the West. We should try to see whatever areas that we can use we can get from them to also better ourselves too, and take advantage of both sides of the equation. And I think if we can successfully navigate both, we would be able to create an Africa that our future children and grandchildren will be like, yeah, this works, this is good. I tried to make this video as short as possible. I hope I succeeded. By the time I finish editing it, I'll hopefully get it down to less than 10 minutes or maybe 15 minutes max. So if you enjoyed this particular video, please like and subscribe and comment and tell me areas you feel I should improve on. Thank you very much.